When Thomas Rodriguez became Chicago's most trusted school bus driver, parents relied on him to transport their children safely. But when his methamphetamine addiction and kidnapping schemes consumed him, he began selling children to trafficking networks and murdering witnesses who discovered his crimes, turning school buses into mobile prisons. Before starting the video, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Now let's get back to the video. The crisp Chicago morning air carried the sounds of children's laughter as Thomas Rodriguez performed his pre-trip bus inspection and prepared route schedules for what would become the most dangerous school transportation assignment of his 18-year career as Illinois' most experienced school bus driver and student transportation specialist. At 49 years old, Thomas had established himself as Chicago's most reliable school bus operator, specializing in special needs transportation and after-school program services that attracted working parents, single mothers, and families with disabled children who valued his expertise in safe student transportation and his reputation for maintaining absolute vigilance during the most vulnerable moments of children's daily routines. Thomas's school bus operation covered multiple routes throughout Chicago's South and West Side neighborhoods, featuring specially equipped vehicles for disabled students, GPS tracking systems for parent monitoring, and emergency communication equipment that allowed real-time coordination with school administrators and law enforcement during transportation emergencies. His passenger list included children from low-income families whose parents worked multiple jobs, special needs, students requiring specialized transportation accommodations, and elementary school children whose long bus routes made them completely dependent on his professional care and protection. The interior of Thomas's primary school bus reflected his commitment to student safety and his understanding of parents' complete trust in his to transport their most precious possessions without harm, featuring federally mandated safety equipment, child-appropriate seating arrangements, and surveillance cameras that were supposedly monitored for student protection and driver accountability. His dashboard displayed commercial driver licenses, school transportation certifications, and safety awards from grateful school districts whose student transportation programs had benefited from his reliable service during emergency situations. But beneath Thomas's reputation for transportation excellence lay a dangerous combination of methamphetamine addiction, child trafficking operations, and systematic murder that had transformed his school buses into mobile kidnapping vehicles where vulnerable students and suspicious investigators met their fate through drug-fueled abduction schemes and witness elimination. "Good morning, Mr. Rodriguez," said Maria Gonzalez, the concerned mother greeting him at the 7:30 bus stop with her 9-year-old daughter Sophia, who had been exhibiting strange behavior and reluctance to ride the school bus following incidents that Maria was beginning to suspect were more serious than the behavioral problems that Thomas had been reporting to deflect her growing concerns about her daughter's welfare during transportation. "Good morning, Mrs. Gonzalez," Thomas replied with the transportation professionalism and child safety expertise that had made him legendary among Chicago's working families who viewed him as both driver and protector, capable of ensuring their children's safe passage through dangerous urban neighborhoods while maintaining absolute care during the most vulnerable periods of students' daily schedules. "Sophia's doing much better with her bus behavior, and I'm sure today will be another successful trip to school." Maria had become Thomas's most dangerous parent, not because of her demanding transportation requirements or her daughter's special needs, but because of her recent discovery of suspicious activities involving Sophia and other children on the bus, and her growing awareness of the trafficking operation that Thomas had been conducting while supposedly providing legitimate student transportation services. What Maria didn't know was that Thomas had been systematically trafficking children and murdering suspicious parents for over 4 years, using his school bus access and transportation expertise to identify vulnerable students while eliminating anyone who discovered his criminal activities. Thomas's transformation from trusted bus driver to calculating killer had begun 6 years earlier, when his methamphetamine addiction had escalated from occasional recreational use to daily dependency that consumed his school transportation salary and forced him into dangerous relationships with organized crime figures who controlled Chicago's drug distribution networks and child trafficking operations. His addiction had grown to cost over $200 per day, while his access to vulnerable children from low-income families had provided opportunities for trafficking that generated substantial additional income through coordination with criminal networks specializing in child exploitation. Faced with increasing pressure from drug suppliers and potential exposure by suspicious school administrators, Thomas had begun using his school bus routes to identify and procure children who could be trafficked to various criminal enterprises, while using his legitimate transportation authority as cover for kidnapping and abuse activities that occurred during supposedly routine school transportation. His criminal activities had escalated when several parents had discovered evidence of inappropriate activities and had threatened to report their suspicions to school authorities and law enforcement agencies investigating child trafficking patterns targeting low-income urban communities. Thomas had murdered his first victim, a single mother who had detected signs of abuse in her son, by staging a fatal hit-and-run accident that appeared to be caused by random urban violence rather than deliberate elimination of a witness. The success of his first murder had convinced Thomas that eliminating suspicious parents and threatening investigators was both necessary for protecting his trafficking operation and relatively easy to accomplish, given his knowledge of urban traffic patterns and his ability to stage vehicle accidents using his school bus or personal vehicles. Over the following 4 years, Thomas had murdered 10 additional individuals using various methods that took advantage of his transportation expertise, his knowledge of victim routines and locations, and his ability to stage deaths as traffic accidents or random urban violence that would not attract detailed investigation by overwhelmed city law enforcement agencies. His victims had been carefully selected based on their discovery of his criminal activities, their potential cooperation with authorities, and their vulnerable circumstances as low-income parents with limited resources for pursuing justice or protection. His victims had included Dr. Patricia Williams, a school social worker who had discovered evidence of child abuse and whose car accident had been staged using sophisticated vehicular homicide techniques; Jennifer Martinez, a parent who had reported suspicious activities to school administrators and whose death had been arranged to appear as carjacking violence; and David Foster, a child protection investigator who had been tracking trafficking patterns and whose consultation with parents had ended in fatal assault disguised as random street crime. "Thomas, I need to discuss some serious concerns about missing children and reports of trafficking activities connected to your school bus routes," said Detective Sarah Rodriguez of the Chicago Police Department's Crimes Against Children unit, as she approached Thomas's bus during morning pickup procedures, carrying warrants to inspect his vehicle and interview him about suspicious activities. Detective Rodriguez specialized in investigating child exploitation and had developed expertise in recognizing patterns of trafficking operations that exploited school transportation systems and vulnerable student populations. Detective Rodriguez's investigation represented an existential threat to Thomas's criminal operation, as her law enforcement expertise and access to child protection databases could expose the systematic trafficking operations and connect him to multiple missing children and suspicious parental deaths. Adhering. "Of course, Detective Rodriguez," Thomas replied, though he felt the familiar surge of methamphetamine-induced paranoia and criminal desperation that accompanied any official scrutiny of his transportation operations by law enforcement officers who possessed the training and resources to detect evidence of child trafficking and systematic murder disguised as urban violence or transportation accidents. "Student safety and transportation security are always my highest priorities, and I want to cooperate with any investigation that might help protect children and ensure that school transportation operates according to all applicable safety and legal standards." Detective Rodriguez consulted detailed reports from missing children investigations and child protection agencies that showed patterns of disappearances and suspicious activities that suggested systematic trafficking operations rather than random child abductions or legitimate transportation emergencies involving student welfare and safety. "Thomas, I've been investigating reports of missing children and suspicious activities that appear to be connected to students who rode on your school bus routes," Detective Rodriguez said with the investigative precision that had made her successful in solving complex child exploitation cases. 10 children who were regular passengers on your school bus have disappeared or been found in circumstances suggesting trafficking, with several of these incidents occurring after their parents had expressed concerns about inappropriate activities or had threatened to report suspicious behavior during school transportation. The detective's identification of the trafficking patterns and her recognition of the timing correlation between parental concerns and child disappearances confirmed Thomas's worst fears that his criminal activities had been analyzed and connected to his systematic elimination of suspicious parents and procurement of vulnerable children for trafficking operations. Thomas's response was swift and deadly, as he realized that eliminating Detective Rodriguez was essential for protecting his criminal enterprise and preventing exposure of his systematic trafficking and murder operations. Detective Rodriguez, I think there may be some misunderstanding about the inherent challenges of school transportation in dangerous urban neighborhoods and the unfortunate reality that children from high-risk families sometimes face problems that have nothing to do with school bus safety, Thomas said, while discreetly reaching for a modified fire extinguisher that he kept on the bus and had weaponized to release concentrated methamphetamine vapor for emergency elimination of law enforcement threats. Perhaps we could discuss these concerns inside the bus, where I can demonstrate the safety procedures that might explain these apparent coincidences. School transportation involves complex safety protocols that might appear suspicious to those unfamiliar with student transportation regulations and urban safety challenges. Detective Rodriguez agreed to examine Thomas's transportation safety procedures, not realizing that the bus driver was leading her into the enclosed bus environment where previous murders had been committed and where Thomas planned to poison her using his modified fire extinguisher that would release toxic methamphetamine vapor while appearing to be accidental exposure to transportation safety equipment. Thomas's plan involved convincing Detective Rodriguez to examine specific safety systems while explaining transportation procedures, then activating his modified extinguisher to fill the bus with methamphetamine vapor, causing fatal respiratory failure that would appear to be accidental chemical exposure rather than deliberate murder by a bus driver protecting his trafficking operations. But Thomas's carefully planned murder of the detective was about to be prevented by the unexpected arrival of federal agents who had been investigating child trafficking networks and had identified connections to his school transportation services. Special Agent Michael Torres of the FBI's Crimes Against Children Division had been conducting a comprehensive investigation into organized child trafficking operations that exploited school transportation systems to identify, procure, and transport minors for various criminal enterprises, including forced labor, sexual exploitation, and illegal adoption networks. Agent Torres specialized in investigating child trafficking and had developed expertise in tracking criminal networks that used legitimate educational services to access vulnerable children. The federal investigation had been initiated by reports from multiple school districts and child protection organizations who had noticed patterns of missing children and suspicious transportation activities that suggested organized trafficking networks were using school buses to identify and kidnap vulnerable students while eliminating potential witnesses. Agent Torres had been conducting surveillance of Thomas's transportation activities and had documented evidence of systematic child procurement, parent elimination, and coordination with trafficking networks that suggested his school bus expertise was being used for organized criminal activity rather than legitimate student transportation services. Thomas Rodriguez, I'm Special Agent Torres with the FBI, he announced as he approached the school bus where Thomas was preparing to murder Detective Rodriguez. I have federal warrants for your arrest on charges of child trafficking, conspiracy to commit kidnapping, conspiracy to commit murder, and multiple counts of first-degree murder related to your systematic exploitation of school transportation services for criminal trafficking operations and elimination of potential witnesses. Thomas's reaction to the federal agent's intervention was a combination of methamphetamine-fueled aggression and desperate attempts to maintain his transportation authority, as he realized that law enforcement agencies at multiple levels had been investigating his trafficking activities and had connected them to systematic parent murders and organized child exploitation. His carefully maintained reputation as a reliable school bus driver had failed to protect him from comprehensive investigation by agencies with expertise in child trafficking and transportation-based crimes. Special Agent Torres, there must be some serious misunderstanding about legitimate school transportation operations and the complex safety challenges involved in providing reliable student transportation through Chicago's most dangerous neighborhoods, Thomas said frantically, while abandoning his plan to poison Detective Rodriguez and attempting to preserve some semblance of transportation professionalism despite the overwhelming evidence against his criminal activities. I am a licensed commercial driver with 18 years of experience providing safe school transportation for Chicago's most vulnerable student populations. All of my transportation operations comply with established federal safety regulations and educational standards designed to protect students while ensuring reliable access to educational opportunities. Detective Rodriguez looked absolutely stunned as she realized how close she had come to being murdered by the bus driver she had been investigating for child trafficking. Her crimes against children investigation had not only exposed Thomas's systematic trafficking and murder operation, but it also prevented her own death at the hands of a killer who had been using school transportation as cover for systematic elimination of parents and law enforcement threats. The comprehensive investigation that followed Thomas's arrest revealed the full scope of his criminal enterprise and the sophisticated methods he had developed to exploit school transportation for systematic child trafficking and murder. Forensic analysis of Thomas's school bus operations revealed extensive evidence of his trafficking activities, including hidden compartments for transporting children, sophisticated communication equipment for coordinating with criminal networks, and detailed records showing child procurement and transportation to various trafficking destinations. His bus contained restraint devices disguised as safety equipment, drugging supplies, and comprehensive files containing information on vulnerable students who had been targeted for trafficking operations. The investigation also uncovered Thomas's connections to organized crime figures who had been coordinating child trafficking operations throughout the Midwest, using his school transportation access as a primary source for identifying and procuring children from low-income families with limited resources for protection or investigation. Most disturbing was the discovery of Thomas's detailed knowledge of student vulnerabilities and family circumstances, which he had used to identify children who could be trafficked without generating significant law enforcement attention, while eliminating parents who posed threats to his criminal activities through systematic violence disguised as urban crime. Thomas Rodriguez was ultimately convicted of 11 counts of first-degree murder, systematic child trafficking, conspiracy to commit kidnapping, conspiracy to commit organized criminal enterprise activities, and numerous other charges related to his exploitation of school transportation services for criminal trafficking operations and elimination of potential witnesses. The conviction sent unprecedented shockwaves throughout Chicago's educational community, prompting immediate reforms in school transportation, oversight, driver screening protocols, and child protection measures designed to protect students from exploitation by trusted transportation professionals involved in criminal activities. Several other school bus drivers and transportation workers were investigated for similar criminal activities, resulting in enhanced oversight of school transportation and new requirements for background monitoring, route tracking, and student protection measures that made it more difficult for criminals to exploit educational transportation for systematic trafficking and murder. Detective Rodriguez and Special Agent Torres received recognition for their collaborative investigation and became specialists in transportation-based crime investigation, developing new techniques for identifying trafficking operations and protecting students from exploitation by criminal transportation professionals. Maria Gonzalez and other surviving families required extensive counseling and security arrangements to overcome the trauma of learning that their trusted school bus driver had been systematically trafficking children and murdering parents while exploiting his transportation access for organized criminal activities. The school transportation industry implemented comprehensive new safety protocols designed to protect students from exploitation by unethical transportation providers. The case prompted comprehensive changes in school transportation regulation, including mandatory federal background checks for all school transportation workers, enhanced oversight of student transportation operations, real-time GPS monitoring of all school buses, and new reporting procedures for suspicious transportation activities involving student safety or potential trafficking indicators. Thomas's conviction also led to increased cooperation between educational organizations and law enforcement agencies investigating child trafficking, with new protocols designed to identify transportation services that might be exploiting their student access for systematic criminal activities while eliminating potential witnesses. The school transportation and broader educational support industries implemented revolutionary new safety measures, including enhanced security protocols for student transportation, comprehensive child protection programs, mandatory reporting of suspicious transportation activities, and improved training for recognizing signs of child trafficking and student endangerment in educational settings. 5 years after Thomas's conviction and life imprisonment, Chicago's school transportation community continued to implement safeguards designed to protect students from transportation workers who might abuse their positions of trust and student access for criminal purposes. The school bus driver, who had promised to transport children safely to and from school, had instead used his transportation expertise and student access to commit systematic child trafficking and murder, while exploiting families' trust and children's vulnerability during their most dependent moments. However, his crimes had been thoroughly exposed and his victims had found justice through the dedication of investigators who refused to accept missing children cases as mere urban disappearances. Thomas Rodriguez's last route had ended at the gates of permanent federal imprisonment, where he would serve multiple life sentences without possibility of parole, proving that even transportation professionals who attempted to exploit their student access for criminal gain could be identified, investigated, and brought to justice when dedicated law enforcement agencies worked together to protect innocent children from predatory school transportation providers. The bus driver's last route had reached its final destination of justice, serving as a lasting reminder that those entrusted with our children's safety must never abuse that sacred responsibility, and that transportation professionals who would exploit student vulnerability for criminal gain will ultimately face the full consequences of their betrayal of educational trust and child protection. Thank you very much for listening. Please let us know what you think of this story in the comments. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Turn on notifications so you don't miss any other videos.